So first we're going to remove our 5 19mm lug nuts. Take off the wheel. So I'm going to use some penetrating spray and spray around the axle where the axle nut is. I'm going to go along the rotor here. So now we're going to take off our axle nut, and this is a 34mm. So now we're going to spray a little bit of penetrant in here. Let that do its job. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to remove this nut right here with a 21mm socket. There we go. Now you're going to hit right here on the knuckle, and you're going to be very careful not to hit the boot. You don't want to pinch the boot. You don't want to mess up your tie rod stud. So now we're just going to use one of our lug nuts, and we're going to put on one of our lug studs. Try to tighten it all the way down so it holds the rotor to the hub. Now what we want to do is gently push back our caliper. To do that, I'm going to use a pry bar, go like this in between the pad and the caliper, and just pry on it just a teeny bit. We don't need to go very far, just enough to relieve pressure from the rotor. Now from the back side of the caliper, you're going to remove your 21mm bolts. There's one here and one up here. Those hold the caliper bracket to the knuckle. That's what the bolt looks like. I'm just going to put it back in for a couple threads here, just so the caliper can't move around once I loosen this one up. We'll remove both these bolts and grab something to hang our caliper by. So next what we're going to do is we're going to follow this wire. It comes up behind these two pins right here, and this is your ABS wire. Take a small pocket screwdriver, right up in here, and just try to pry those out. Once this is out, I'll show you what it looks like. There we are. This is the connector for your ABS. You'll notice you have a red lock right here. You need to push that lock so it separates, and then you're going to push in on that tab. Continue with your pocket screwdriver, pull out the tab. Squeeze this, give it a tug. Check your connection. This looks great. So we'll follow the ABS wire, and you'll notice along the brake hose, there's a couple clips. Just take your small screwdriver, open those up. Pull your ABS wire and put it out someplace where you can see it clearly. Next, we're going to remove our upper ball joint nut. That's a 21mm. Remove that carefully, it's going to be hot. Take your ball joint nut, put it back on for a couple of threads. Next, we're going to hit right here on the knuckle with our hammer. As you can tell, that broke free. So let's carefully move our ABS wire for a second. We're going to take our punch, or if you have an air chisel, right in the center, drive this through. The axle moves freely, we can continue. Take your ABS wire, just put it back where you've had it. Next, we're going to remove our lower ball joint nut using a 21mm socket. Leave that on a couple threads. Use your hammer and bonk right here on the knuckle. At this point, I'm going to hold this up, remove the lower ball joint nut, let it down a little bit. Go again, we're going to remove the upper. At this point, all the weight's going to be on you, and you're going to have to slide it off of the axle. Use your 18mm wrench and put it on this bolt head. Use your 21mm socket and remove this nut. So now I'm going to use my hammer and I'm going to bonk on the other side of this bolt. So from the front side of the vehicle, use a little punch. And then we'll remove that bolt. We're going to use our 18mm wrench back here on the nut, and we're going to use our 18 on the front and remove this bolt. Next, we're going to use our pry bar, and we're going to go between the differential and the axle and just try to pry that axle out of the differential. Continuing with our pry bar, you're going to take it and you're going to find an area that you can use to pry, because we want to bring down this control arm so we can get the axle down and out. Should want to pop out of here. There it is. Down through there. Pull it right off to the side. So now we're just going to spray some copper never sees inside on the splined area of the axle. Perfect. All right, so we've got that sprayed. Let's get it in here. I'm just going to go right up like this. Get it so it's ready. Pull down on this control arm again like we did before. Get your axle under there. Bring this over, line up the splines of the axle on the differential tube splines. Use a rubber mallet, and I like to keep the nut on there so it's flush, and bonk it in. Double check to make sure you're in as far as it can go. This is definitely in as far as it'll go. This looks great. So we're going to take our bolt that holds our strut to our lower control arm, and we're going to come from the back side and slide it through the holes. Line up the holes the best you can. There it is. We're going to take our nut, put that on there, and now we'll bottom that out. Using your 21mm socket and your 18mm wrench, bottom this out. Let's torque this to 110 foot-pounds. There it is. Let's take off this axle nut, get it out of the way. Move this. Now you're going to take your knuckle, slide the axle inside the bearing, and slide this up, and I'm going to put on my lower ball joint nut. At that point, I can release and relax. So now we're going to tighten up our lower ball joint nut. We're just going to bottom it out. Perfect. All right. Grab a pry bar. Lower this upper control arm down into the hole in the knuckle and start the nut. Use your 21mm. Retighten this upper ball joint. If you notice the studs moving, I'll show you what to do next. So now we're going to pull down on the upper control arm, grab your pry bar, and go right in between one of the coils and the control arm and push it right down. Use your 21mm socket and tighten this up. All right, take your bolt, put it through the upper portion of your sway bar link. Snug that up. Tighten this upper ball joint nut to 30 foot-pounds. Tighten up your lower ball joint nut to 40 foot-pounds. So So we're going to take our 18mm wrench, come from the back side. Just get that on there. And we're going to torque this down. 90 foot-pounds. Torqued. Grab your 2 caliper bolts. Bring your caliper over and get ready to remount. Let's bottom these out. Now we're going to torque these bolts down to 100 foot-pounds. Insert your outer tie rod end into the knuckle, start the nut. Let's attempt to bottom out the nut. If the stud spins, apply pressure. Let's torque this down to 30 foot-pounds. We have our ABS wire. You're going to put in the clips going along the hose. Click that in there. Click it together. Try pulling it apart. If it doesn't pull apart, lock it in. Put this back in. Make sure it's secure and it's not rubbing anywhere. Install your new axle nut. Let's torque this down. Take a long pry bar and set it through your wheel studs. Torque your axle nut to 100 foot-pounds. All right, so let's get the wheel back up on here. Let's bottom these out. All right, so let's go ahead and torque down these lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds.